just heard Hung, Drawn, and Quartered from Surrounded by Thieves from High and Fire, this Direct Metal podcast. I'm Mark.
And I'm Jason. And we ventured from the foothills of Norway back home to America.
To the rough streets of Oakland.
Yeah, rough streets. The Oakland scene. Yeah. We were commenting, besides Neurosis, I don't know.
Punk scene was huge.
Yeah, that's true.
There,
which Neurosis kind of grew out of.
Yeah.
Was Sleep from Oakland too, or just Matt Pike and High and Fire? I'm
guessing because they were from Asbestos Death.
Oh, okay.
Which a couple of those guys went on to form Sleep with Pike.
It was Asbestos Death. I haven't heard much of that. Is that more like punk and like some
it's
of that
really
stuff,
fucking noisy.
Okay. Kind of like where Neurosis was coming out of with their early stuff.
Yeah, more sludgy hardcore punk kind of stuff.
Gotcha. Cool. And this is a band that's was the album of the month a couple months back, and Decibel you did an illustration for. Weren't they album of the month? Or did they just get a 9? I can't remember. I thought they were the lead. No, the last time I did one, lead for them was Snakes of the Divine. Snakes of the Divine. Okay. Well, their new record came out irregardless of that, which is called De Vermis Mysteriis, which means Mysteries of the Worm, and we'll be getting to that later on in the show. So the beauty of doing a High on Fire show is even though they got 6 albums and they got a lot of long songs, you can kind of hit the basic themes of them
with one song,
with 1 or 2 songs per record, and kind of get there. I mean, even though we obviously would love to play more, you kind of get the basic surrounding picture. And I don't know. I think alongside Mastodon, they've certainly been one of the biggest surprises for legitimate heavy mainstream American bands.
They've had pretty decent mainstream success, and touring with like Metallica and stuff like that too, so it's at least for short little stints. But you put a lot of these bands together, and like I would have not expected they would have been one of the bands that like kind of blew up.
But it's weird that you say that, because I remember when Surrounded by Thieves came out, and it came out like kind of on the foothills of when Relapse put out like some of the first Mastodon stuff, and and there just seemed to be like an aura around these guys that I didn't quite get at first. Like I liked them and I was like, oh, cool. But like I almost saw them as like a byproduct or part of the kind of burgeoning stoner rock scene and doom rock scene that had kind of existed for a few years. The Meteor City, TMCs, the Man's Ruin kind of stuff. And
even though that's popped out right before it really started going down the toilet.
Yeah, before the bubble sort of burst. So I kind of was like, oh, cool. Like it's another band. But I also knew there was like a harder edge to them, a little bit more, Mötorhead.
Well, I think just the pedigree of, because Sleep was huge.
Yeah.
I mean, they might not have sold huge, but they were like hugely influential and like very well known, especially after they broke up.
They almost were bigger later, in hindsight kind of band.
Because there's so many issues with, Jerusalem/Dope Smoker coming out, being re-recorded, remixed, all that kind of crap.
And then there's sort of a little notoriety. They got a song, in Gummo, too, which was kind of cool,
This kid's riding his bike with cats in a trash bag.
Yeah.
But I think that was kind of a lot of it was just like, okay, well, Sleep was so non-prolific with how they only, had 3 records out, basically. And their first record's kind of a snoozer. So they had like 2 really solid records come out, but they're, the second, Sleep's Holy Mountain, was very repetitive. It wasn't like, they didn't really have their own identity.
It was like a mantra record, it was just sort of like...
So I think seeing because I think they were pretty lazy too as far as touring and all that stuff went. So when Pike came out with High and Fire, I think it was just like, okay, finally we're going to get like some potential shown out of these guys too, because there's a lot of hype around that first record for sure.
I mean, Relapse pushed it really, well, I guess it's not the first record, but the first Relapse record, because the first record's already self-defense, but I guess for all intents and purposes, that was the first one I heard, was where Hung, Drawn, and Quartered came from. And that's kind of a song that's, I guess, near and dear only because that's it. That was my first exposure. I ended up actually, I was telling you, getting that song into mainstream rotation on our college radio station up in CMU and stuff, which it got played for like a summer. And that's when I was kind of in with the music director, and I kind of whispered in his ear and kind of just got him to like make a couple of like odd choices and stuff. Yeah, which was cool,
Enough modern rock. We need some hard rock.
No doubt. Something with a little bit more, And he was like, well, the vocals are a little rough, but the music's certainly catchy, and like the drums are really cool, and and all those sort of elements. But I guess I think the mistake would be that I made is placing them in the context of that stoner rock doom scene, when I feel like they have a lot more in common with like kind of like 80s, early 80s heavy metal and like 70s like just big booming rock, whether it's Sabbath or Blue Cheer or even like late 70s, early 80s Mötorhead or whatever you want to call it.
Like 70s Judas Priest in there in parts, especially drumming, which is weird because the drums are a mix of. Earlier we were trying to figure out like what his style is, and I was like, well, it's like he's got the bombacity of of Bonham, and then like he doesn't really have like the texturedness of Ward, but just kind of like the frantic, drum rolls and stuff like that too, and a little bit of Scott Trivers from Judas Priest in there too. But yeah, it was hard to really kind of like nail down what his style is. It's like real tom heavy. It's not really using a ton of like cymbal work, but it's constantly just going.
He plays with a lot of like provocation. I mean, just like really just he's like caveman like, but there's a swing to it though too. I mean, like the way that Bill Ward swings a little with like kind of a slight jazz element to it, but certainly like the band is a 3-piece, like kind of forms that sort of trio mentality that, I mean, Blue Cheer was a trio, Cream was a trio, and you can somehow, I mean, even Jimi Hendrix, you can almost kind of get something like more like immediate and provocate it out of that because it's like just punchier or something, there's not a lot of fat to it. It's just kind of right in your face, and he doesn't play in the way that like Brain from Mastodon plays or Lombardo or any of these other sort of guys that create a big bombastic sound because he's not overly technical. No, but he's not like he's not Meg White or Velvet Underground caveman like But
there's Neurosis qualities for sure as far as like the kind of like textured layering, just you know all this kind of almost not tribal-ish, but some it has more. I think his drumming has more roots like in traditional music than it does in rock music. A lot of it is for like kind of almost like hand drumming, but taken over to a drum kit or something.
I think that's what's interesting about Hung Drawn and Quartered. That intro. I mean, it's obviously very catchy, but it's kind of like oscillating the way it like it's got like a monolithic, like you said, almost like a Kodo drummer's hand like Middle Eastern sort of thing kind of going on. And the way that song sort of propels, and I think one of the things they do so well that I think a song like Hung Drawn and Quartered personifies for him is that sort of like full speed ahead Mötorhead, but like glacial, like it's just big. It's like it's like
dragging everything force,
with it. And it's because it's not like Electric Wizard like just plodding and slow, or even Neurosis where it's just overwhelmingly heavy but still very slow. It's got a lot of movement and drive to it because of the way that Des sort of propels things. But
I mean, he's almost kind of it's going to sound obvious, but like the tempo maker for the band. But a lot of the time bands will actually follow, like the guitar will be more the leading instrument. It almost seems like the drums are the lead instrument, and that opens up Pike and the various bassists he had to kind of like play around that. So that's just like the real like loose structure where he can just kind of let things go.
And I think that's going back to like power trios and sort of I guess the first great classic power trio. It's kind of the way Ginger Baker did it with like Cream in a weird way. I mean, I don't know if I'm focusing too much because it is the trio, but again, I think there's something.
Well, even if you break down Sabbath minus Ozzy, as far as how they work together, that's just kind of a similar kind of vibe.
Yeah, one guitar, one bass.
Because Iommi's doing his own thing, and then Ward and Geezer Butler are both doing their own. They're playing around the beat and not like just straight on it every single time.
That's a good.
I just watched that Paranoid thing, the classic albums or whatever last night. So
VH1 classics. Well, I guess we already mentioned you got in the early incarnation, the two guys that are consistent in the band, and obviously I think the two most important components are of course vocalist, guitarist Matt Pike, who came from Sleep. And on these first couple records, it's George Rice, correct, on bass?
Yeah.
Where'd he come from? Was he from Sleep too, or somewhere else?
I wrote that down.
Okay.
I didn't. I wrote where some of the other guys came from.
All right. Well, George Rice will be on The Art of Self-Defense, their debut, which we'll be talking about here in a moment. And then he was just there on.
He helped name the band. Is based on they're throwing out like song titles or that might work for a band name. And I guess George is a big fan of ELO, of the song "Fire on High."
Who isn't?
I've got
Jeff
the older I get, the more of a respect I have for Jeff Lynne. He's a great composer.
Don't Bring Me Down's a classic rock staple.
Blue Skies, man.
Yeah.
Or Mr. Blue Sky. But yeah, then Matt Pike just switched it around to High and Fire, which I always assumed. I mean, it has like stoner connotations. Just right there,
especially coming out of Sleep, which was so based around weed and those other things.
The last record called Dope Smokers. So what do you expect? But Yeah, just a weird name all around, because I don't really know if, like, what that really, if anybody that's not in the scene, when they hear that name, like, what's that even conjure to them in their mind? It's kind of a weird thing all around.
And then Dez's, I didn't write it down. I always forget Dez's last name.
Kensel,
yeah, that's what it is. And he's the secret weapon, I think, of the band. Yeah. Really, I mean, Matt Pike's a awesome guitar player, and his solo work as years go on get more and more kind of improvisational and cool, not predictable,
but he's loose. He's not a super technical player either, which I really like,
which is cool. Yeah. But I think without Des, they're still a great band, but I think he's just that element that maybe
he's the factor that every album he's the thing that you notice the most.
Outside of his drum production kind of
works. Like he's like upping his game a little bit. But I mean, because really you look at their entire back catalog, and it's all very, very similar, except it's almost like, okay, what is the new... Because they have pretty high-profile producers. Mm-hmm. What's this producer bring to each, incarnation of the band or whatever?
Yeah, and I was mentioning to you, off mic earlier that there's almost a bolt thrower-like quality and of consistency of sound. And you mentioned, what was the band you sort of brought up that has almost like 3 different types of sound? I can't remember.
Oh, like the Maiden thing?
Yeah, kind of like...
Just because, like if you break down like their riff structures, there's only like 2 or 3 riff structures that are kind of like the basis for everything, like kind of the off-time thing, and then more of the stoner riffs. If I would have taken more time, I could have figured out exactly what they were. But if you listen to all albums back to back, it's like when you hear like a Maiden song off of like the first album, and you hear something off like Fear of the Dark, you can still hear these same kind of like stylistic approaches to playing guitar. And
I think that's maybe where these guys have gotten a foothold in the American scene, is there's sort of now like a kind of a basic expectation of them, and there's like a cult following, but also a mainstream following of that, and I don't know, much in the same way that...
I mean, they're going on that, what is that, Monster Energy drink thing, or what the fuck is that fest called? Slayer and Slipknot.
Oh, yeah.
They're playing one of the smaller stages on that. But yeah, them and Dillinger and Mastodon, all of that era all kind of came out in the same era too.
And all early started 2000s with Relapse. Relapse kind of had a vision for these kind of unique
bands. But 3
bands.
very different bands, but somehow have made a kind of fairly decent, like as far as metal goes, mainstream success with it.
I guess it goes to show, like, if you actually get promoted in the right way, and like you
exhaustively tour,
you get the right tours. Like they're 3 very hardworking bands. I've happened to see High on Fire twice. You said you've seen them twice as well.
2 or 3 times.
We saw them once together with Kyleza, and
that was just last year.
Was that Torch show too? Was Torch at that show?
Might have been.
I want to say they were.
Yeah.
But
I saw them at the 2002 Contaminated Festival that Relapse is putting on, that was Neurosis and Mastodon, basically their entire roster at that point.
I think that was the one you and Brian went to. I think I was student teaching.
No, me and Mark went to it.
Oh, okay. Was it just you and Coffin?
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. And but so, I mean, they've obviously, that's when they got really bigly established, was Surrounded by Thieves. It was in 2002. But Art of Self-Defense comes out in 2000, and he said it was like about 6 months after Sleep broke up, they actually kind of put this all together.
Yeah. Well, the band was formed then.
Okay. Yeah, that was
relatively
quickly.
98,
99.
98.
Okay.
Yeah, because the last record, Jerusalem was like held up. It was going to be issued by somebody else, then Earache put it out after the fact, and, trimmed a good, 15, 20 minutes off it.
Sure. And then the version I have is Jerusalem, which is 52 minutes.
That's the Earache one, isn't it?
The TMC one.
Okay.
Music Cartel. So, and then, Dope Smoker is that the Earache one, or is that the Man's Rune one?
Well, he was originally going to go on a major.
Oh, okay.
And they were like, fuck, you're not putting this out. That's one long song, and it's called Dope Smoker. We're not going to put this out. So then I think it might have had something to do with the Columbia Earache partnership.
Really?
Like toward the tail end of that. I don't know if it's Columbia or if it's another label, but Earache eventually ended up putting it out and then probably licensed to Man's Ruin later.
Okay. Yeah, that's funny. And, Sleep, that record is a Hall of Fame decibel. You can read kind of the backstory if you get a hold. I can't remember what issue it's in, but,
that's what
find it online and stuff. Yeah. But it's probably pretty interesting story, to say the least, So, but as we sort of approach their first record, Art of Self-Defense, I guess the one thing I would say about this is the first 2 records, Billy Anderson does the production, and he's of course known for doing more sludgier, dirtier kind of stuff. He's worked with
Cathedral and Brutal Truth and God, I used to know every band he's.
I Hate God. I want to say he's done some stuff.
That sounds
for.
Right.
Probably even like Soylent Green and some of that.
But he was kind of the producer du jour at that point. Of like, no, he was like the poor man's Steve Albini kind of.
Yeah, kind of noise sludge kind of stuff.
Yeah. So he was like getting that kind of stuff out of bands, but really with I don't know how much he really helped High and Fire with Art of Self Defense because it's so muddy.
Well, the problem with both records, I mean, Surrounded by Thieves is leaps and bounds ahead of Art of Self-Defense, but I think you really like kind of see how muddy the production of Anderson was in general once you get to like, you know, Death is the Communion and things like that. You actually hear like, oh, when they clear up their sound, you can actually hear all these like dynamic elements, you know, that are kind of hidden in the sound.
Well, I know later on Pike was starting to play like a 12-string or 9-string, something weird, but just to basically fatten up his sound so he can still play almost like play some chords and let them ring out and then do other shit cool underneath it.
Stuff. Yeah, but I mean, I guess the thing I would say about Art of Self-Defense, you know, it's obviously coming out of the Wizard and the early Electric Wizard kind of sound and St. Vitus and some of that kind of stuff. It's, you know, definitely inspired by Weed. You know, like the lyrics we're going to hear for Baghdad are, you know, kind of in that same league. So he's sort of like graduating out of Sleep, but he still isn't like shaking all of the stoner connotations, you know. Because I feel like when you get to Surrounded by Thieves, they've moved fully out of like stoner rock into metal. I mean, they sort of start to formulate themselves into like this nondescript, non-genreified metal band that has fast parts, slow part, and you know they just can kind of do whatever they want. Whereas I feel like they're all, I don't want to say they're pigeonholed, but they're still like almost trapped in the scene on this record.
Well, they were running off the success of Sleep and the notoriety of them too, so it kind of makes sense. But yeah, Surrounded by Thieves is definitely where they kind of become their own thing.
Yep. And this, you know, I mean, I don't want to say this record lacks like confidence or anything, but what it reminds me of is really that self-titled Electric Wizard record, which sounds like a standard doom metal record of its time. And then once you get to Come My Fanatics, you're like, oh shit, this is a band that's doing something different. You know what I mean? Like once you hear that, it's like, whoa, night and day. You know?
Yeah, because there's only so much you can,
like Sabbath cathedral riffs.
So much you can do with that kind of, especially that early Rise Above stuff that was all very similar to that sound. You know?
Yeah, the Rise Above Man's Ruin kind of scene that was all sort of, you know, there, and it's got a, you know, Baghdad. What we're gonna hear. You know, it's got kind of a cool little endearing solo. You know, you can start to hear the roots of what, you know, the way that Pike's going to approach his guitar playing. And
now he's got his own signature line of guitar pickups.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy, you know, how far these guys have come, you know, to being on a big label, you know. And then, of course, you know, Billy Anderson still does the Surrounded by Thieves, and we'll hear another tune from that called Nemesis. And what I like about Nemesis is it kind of starts with a really nice fast intro, so you get a taste of that element, like when they really want to sort of play a more up-tempo kind of tune. You know, they don't always have to play kind of mid-tempo monolithic, you know.
Well, that's one thing. The further you go into their career, the faster they get. Yeah. Too, like they actually, you know, incorporate like double bass later on, which some people are like, oh man, that's stupid. What are you doing that for? Like, it makes sense. Like, how much can you go, like, mid-pace all the time? Sure. And especially starting out as a band like Sleep and then morphing, like, you want to have a little bit more speed because otherwise it's just plodding too much, you know? Yeah. Because they're a really heavy band that I never get bored watching live. No. Because they always have, like, energy no matter what's going on.
And, I mean, in a way, like, do you think it's fair to say, like, on the, you know, like, what I hear with Surrounded by Thieves, maybe in its context, and maybe this is how I perceived the record at the time because of the, you know, it came out right around the same time as Remission. They're almost like a less dynamic kind of Mastodon, in the way that Mastodon was like had trappings of sludge rock being from Georgia, but they were doing like completely other things. And these guys have some trappings in the doom metal scene, but yet they're doing Mötorheadisms and Celtic Frostisms and Venomisms and Blue Cheerisms. And I mean, I guess I
personally never really understood the sludge tag on Mastodon.
I guess I just hear it on Remission, and then after that it's like gone.
I mean, some of the guitar tone is, but there's more like grindcore and you know, New York.
I think it's that Boston meets Georgia thing. It's such a weird amalgam of styles. It's got a little southern fried grind or something.
I'd say almost more southern rock than the sludge. Yeah, but that's a category that's so.
I mean, what's the difference between doom rock and stoner rock and doom metal and
sludge core?
It gets real.
I start hating
real strange after a while. But what's cool about Nemesis too, besides the sort of faster intro, is you get these really cool, almost like early Caius Blues for the Red Sky kind of swing movements to it, and then again a kind of signature bubbling to the surface, Matt Pike solo,
the eruptive ones,
the eruptive solos in the middle. So, and then from there we'll sort of kind of turn corners to the record that follows and actually changes up producers a little bit, and we'll sort of introduce it here and kind of talk about it more. That's Blessed Black Wings, which Steve Albini sort of produced, and definitely listen for a different sound when you get to Face of Oblivion, because certainly with the organic qualities that Albini brings to it, gives it a more colder, more thunderous. It's like a weird, I don't know.
I think it better represents
more controlled in a sense.
What the band is.
Yeah.
More. That's probably the first time it was really represented well.
Yeah, but I know some people really had issues with it, and I don't know if it was more and we can talk about this when we come back a little bit more, but this album's kind of divisive for some people, which I never knew until I started doing some research, because some people really like the sort of traditional Billy Anderson-ness. Yeah. He's kind of, he's safe in that scene.
Was it production-wise, or I think it was just songwriting-wise?
And it could have been that.
Because it went more metal, I think. But
yeah, and this is definitely Face of Oblivion, which you'll hear is as metal as it gets. I mean, it's almost like cliche, but bold and fresh at the same time. Yeah. That's what I kind of dig about.
And we got Joe Preston on bass, Melvins.
Yeah, we'll talk about some of the lineup changes and stuff when we come back. So we got Baghdad from Art of Self-Defense, and then Nemesis, another tune there from Surrounded by Thieves, which we started the show off with. Then we got Face of Oblivion from Blessed Black Wings, and then we'll close with our first Death is This Communion tune. We'll talk about that when we come back. That was Turk from Death Is This Communion, The Face of Oblivion from Blessed Black Wings, Nemesis from Surrounded by Thieves, and we got things started with Baghdad from The Art of Self-Defense.
Yeah, man.
Good old Baghdad. Pre Second Invasion Baghdad, so it's a little bit of sadness there. So
give them time. There'll be another one.
I'm sure. we'll figure out a way to blow Baghdad up again. But yeah, kind of going back to we already talked about the first two songs there, but getting back, I guess, into Blessed Black Wings. I really loved this record when it came out. Although I think what I loved about it is I loved certain songs more than listening to the whole record. I think some of the songs are very forgettable on the record, near the end especially. I just, like Blessed Black Wings, the title track is kind of a classic. If we had more time, we'd play that. But
that was their last Relapse record as well. So right. I don't know if it was one of those cases where like a Melvin's Prick kind of thing where they're trying to get out of their contract, or
I mean, it didn't seem uninspired per se, but like you said, maybe it was like almost trying too hard to be like over the top metal, and I mean
they toured a lot on that record too, because that came out in 2007 and then they didn't put
that was 2005. Death Is the Communion comes out in 2007. So
that's what I was talking about more, is the Death Is the Communion.
Oh, okay, gotcha. But I mean, I don't know, like the Albini sound, I think maybe, do you think the metal community is still like out on Albini because he's so associated with, I guess, indie rock and that sort of elitist attitude? I mean, even though he does Neurosis, I mean, I don't know.
I don't think a lot of people really
pay attention to that kind of stuff. Yeah, you're probably right. I mean, I don't know. It's what I like about like that tune we just heard, Face of Oblivion, is it just has that great like middle build up. I mean, it's almost like a Neurosis, like with this like great release, know, and the way that Albini's like able to like organically layer the sort of drum build ups and.
Well, I think it's nice to bring in somebody who's not like a traditional, whatever your genre is, like like Rick Rubin was not a metal producer.
Yeah,
and he came in and made Slayer sound cool. Great. You know,
and same with Danzig. He looked at Danzig from a totally different scope.
Well, then what he did with like Johnny Cash and stuff as well, like just really good kind of an aesthetic ear for this stuff and like how to make it be the best thing it can be of its make it sound the most like them as possible.
Yeah.
So I always like having like different genre people come in, more of the indie rock and post punk stuff that Albini was doing. I'd much rather have him do it than some, I don't know, Eric Rutan or something who's done basically just technical death metal records.
Sure, and he's good at it, but it's not. But it's what you're getting with him. He's meat and potatoes, kind of thing.
Yeah. He doesn't necessarily have a stamp on his. He doesn't have his own sound like some producers do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And from a marketing standpoint too, what's interesting, we haven't really talked about this yet, and you, I guess, as an artist, can sort of lend yourself. The imagery of High on Fire is pretty cool. They don't really market themselves as a in the stoner doom genre. They sort of just market themselves as like a kind of like a battle band.
It's like barbarian shit almost.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of went back to like Cirith Ungol is like a weird band that like fits them almost. Cirith Ungol, like you can't really put them in a genre. You just hear their music and it's like a amalgam of all these weird styles. You just like, oh, they're fucking metal. That's what High on Fire is to me. It's like they're just metal. That's all they are. And whether it's battle metal or barbarian metal or even some like there's like Viking qualities to some of the stuff, like especially in like Frosthammer, which we'll be hearing. I mean, it's like I mean, it's just like bombastic, like.
Well, the good thing is like a lot of those bands, like Mastodon and other bands of that era, they all had a sense of humor about their lyrics, and they weren't trying to be like pretentious about what they were putting together, like a Amon Amarth record or something, where it's a conceptual album about some Viking battle that maybe never really happened. But I don't know. I guess there's a certain spot for all that stuff, but I prefer bands that have more of a sense of humor about what they do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
just because I don't know how you couldn't. I have a sense of humor about it. Like, if you're really singing about barbarians and you're just like completely serious, I don't think I want to hang out with you.
Yeah, I mean, it's like people who take Conan the Barbarian maybe too seriously. It's like some deep like philosophical metaphor.
Well, it makes me think of just like people cosplaying. Like, Star Wars is a great movie, but I'm not going to dress up like a fucking stormtrooper and march around a convention or something like that. That doesn't seem like fun to me. That seems like you're taking it too serious.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know. Just have a good time.
Yeah. Why can't everybody just enjoy the fun of battle metal? Yeah, so, and then they kind of take a 2-year break, and then they come back with another kind of offbeat producer, a guy kind of near and dear to my heart, being sort of a baby of the grunge era, which is Jack Endino, kind of a sub-pop producer.
Didn't he eventually go on to do an Enslaved record, too?
I want to say he was associated with...
I thought he did that last one.
The last Enslaved, yeah. Which is really cool, for Enslaved to sort of get working with a guy like that. But, Endino's, notoriety is he did the very first Nirvana, Bleach, he did Old Soundgarden, Mudhoney, Tad...
Super Suckers, Hole.
Yeah, a lot of that type of stuff.
He's a real sarcastic guy, too, if you ever see him interview.
Oh, he's in some of the documentaries I show in my rock and roll class, talking about stuff. And, yeah, he's funny dude.
He's really dry.
Yep. I'm trying to remember who he reminds me of. I don't know. He kind of is like a
he reminds me of a record store clerk.
Yeah.
But from the early 80s.
Well, he reminds me of Dave Levi. Kind of a little bit,
but a little more snarky. This guy used to own a used bookshop that had comics in it where we grew up.
We sort of grew up in Mount Pleasant.
He was he was a guru.
Shout out to Dave Levi if you're listening somewhere, to our High on Fire podcast. But Death is a Communion. This is a record I was just telling Mark before we started recording. Like, I put it away a few years ago and pulled it out recently before we did this show, and I forget, like, this is a fucking awesome record. Like, it's way better than I remember it being. And I don't know if I heard it in the wrong time. Some records just come out and you're like, oh, this is cool, but you don't really invest in them at the time they came out. And
you just file it.
You sort of realize that they're way it's way more dynamic stuff going on. But the song we heard there, Turk, very scorching. I really like what I like about this song. Kind of really just goes for it. I wrote down here, and it kind of connects back to the Mötorhead quality, and we haven't really talked about his vocals, but we can get into that in a second. But it's like Mickey D, King Diamond type drumming in Turk, where it just kind of goes for it a little bit.
Oh yeah, Well, Mickey D's in Mötorhead now.
Exactly, so that's what I'm saying. Sense, it's kind of got that sort of thing, and definitely the vocals in Turk in particular. You and I were both commenting, it's probably one of his better vocal lines. Very catchy. Almost there's a hint of almost melodicism there, but without like selling himself short or trying to do something he shouldn't try to do or stretching himself.
He's got a harsh, a Lemmy-ish approach, but I don't know, certain songs or he's got a certain kind of like harmonic quality to it, to where it can actually carry notes out, which usually that kind of vocal style you don't. It's more kind of like rapid fire and choppy, but yeah.
And maybe that's another reason these guys...
And some people give him shit for when he does the more singing stuff in that style, but I'd rather just you don't ever... If you hear a Mötorhead record and Lemmy was singing and he didn't have any kind of gruff nature to his voice, it sounds weird.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound right.
Yeah.
So just, I don't know, fucking go for it.
Well, and something we learned on the wonderful That Metal show when Lemmy was on last time is the reason Lemmy sings with the microphone so high is so he can open his throat up and properly get all the
get it all out there,
get all the air out. So thank you once again, That Metal show, for really educating the metal public about all these wise, wonderful things. But yeah,
I heard the new Chickenfoot record's coming out.
Oh gosh, I can't wait. And what's weird about this record, I wrote down, it's got like a Middle Eastern quality to it. We'll hear that in Waste of Tiamat and stuff, and even a song you and I both, if we had more time, wanted to play an instrumental called D2, which kind of has a mellotron and very, like you said, like almost like a battle montage from like Conan. It's anthemic and really a nice way to use an instrumental, not just as filler, but like as a cool like song you can That's what I like.
Their stuff's real visually evocative, like Immortal is to me too.
Yeah, and they never have like waste of time, like filler stuff. We'll play
even with the songs being 7, 8, 9, 10 minutes long.
Yeah,
it never seems like there's just like a bunch of fat.
Sure,
or they're just trying to pad time.
Sure. Although, like I said, in Blessed Black Wings, like there's probably songs that are less memorable than others, and I mean, that's going to be true of any band that's very samey, like High on Fire. I mean, even Iron Maiden has some memorable songs and some that are like, they're Iron Maiden songs, but they're not like in my pantheon of like what I want to listen to all the time. But it's also kind of thrashier elements to it too. It's not as
Well, this is the introduction with Jeff Matz from Zeke on bass.
Well, and we didn't really talk too much about Joe Preston, but from the Melvins, I know you mentioned this.
I mean, what else?
He was filling in. That's all he was. He wasn't ever intended to be a
permanent member. Yeah.
But yeah, Zeke, George Rice, right?
What's that?
Is it George Rice?
Jeff Matz.
Jeff Matz. George Rice, the first bassist.
Yeah, the dude from Zeke. Yeah, he's been with them ever since. So I think that's kind of the core lineup now.
And isn't this right around the time? Didn't Zeke get signed with Relapse right around this time? Is that how they met? Probably. I mean, I don't know. Where's Zeke from? Are they a West Coast band or?
I really don't know much about them except they were on Relapse, and I didn't really care about them.
I liked them. They were okay. I didn't love them. You know, I think like I heard the record. I was like, oh, yeah, I could get.
It was like
this.
Macabre. It was like a band that was always around, but you know, I appreciate them, but I didn't really care.
Well, now they've gone into he's sown his fruits with High on Fire. So, but yeah, so Death is a Community. I don't know if you have any other thoughts about like the use of the Middle Eastern stuff. I don't know where all of a sudden that kind of came out of, but it seems to work.
Yeah, it's definitely not forced. I mean, it definitely kind of works within the kind of constructs of what they were doing before.
Yeah, and a song we don't have time to play too, Fury Whip, which kind of kicks the whole record out. That's the song that like really made me think of like Bolt Thrower, because it's almost a continuation of Blessed Black Wings. So it's like the same like consistency that record had, but then it kind of...
Well, it did bring some more high end to the sonic, kind of thing. It's not just pummeling all
what's
the time.
Cool is like in the middle of that song, it starts to like move towards like a new sound, and then you get the second track on that record, which we're about to play in a moment, which is Waste of Tiamat, and that kind of opens up with a really cool like acoustic kind of Eastern, Mediterranean, Middle Eastern kind of flavor.
Pretty unlike anything they've done. They don't do it very often. It's kind of a treat.
Yeah, and I wrote, it's as if Mellencamp was a doom rock band, which might not make any sense to most of you out there, but it was the thought that came to my mind as I heard Waste of Tiamat.
Scales, man.
Yeah, plus they get to scream Tiamat a whole bunch, which is cool. But I love this solo. This might be my favorite, one of my favorite solos that he does, certainly of all time, and it's, as Mark was kind of saying before, very improvisational. It doesn't feel forced. It's really organic. I said, who's this sound like? And we couldn't really like put wrap our heads around it or actually come up with an effective name. I said, almost reminds me of this kind of things that Randy Rhoads sometimes tried, like in Over the Mountain, which feels not like so, like Crazy Train. You can tell he's just like, it's really like practice. Yeah. And it's great, that's fine. We've all heard it a million times, but there was something always I liked about the explosiveness of Over the Mountain. It was almost like dangerously close to like veering
like him
off.
losing
losing it a little bit, and I kind of like that quality that he does.
Well, there's never anytime Pike ever does a solo, it never seems overly thought out or overly like technical. Like if he hits 3 or 4 strings, as long as he's doing his thing, like I kind of expect a little bit of that kind of like, because sloppiness. It's not necessarily sloppiness, but he's keeping up the rhythm as he's playing a lead as well.
Yeah. Yep. So we got Waste of Tiamat coming up, and then Snakes for the Divine. This for me is probably my least listened to of the High on Fire records, probably besides their first one, I guess.
Do you have the Best Buy exclusive that I have with the live tracks?
I don't know if I do.
I think that was the last time I went to Best Buy.
I do not.
Okay.
I think I bought this at Rockabilly's, may it rest in peace, old record store kind of in this area. But I don't know. I don't not like Snakes for the Divine. I just don't listen to it that much, and I couldn't really tell you why. I don't know. The production is Greg Fiddleman, who did World Painted Black from Slayer, and it definitely is kind of a brighter sound, and you almost hear the Slayer production, especially in the drums. Again, it's almost always the drums.
Well, that dude, the producer actually worked with Rick Rubin quite a bit too, and like Johnny Cash era as like an engineer and stuff too. So
he sort of grew out of understanding what Slayer drums were sort of supposed to kind of come out of. But I don't know. The song we're going to hear, Frosthammer. I mean, it's pretty standard kind of for these guys, but at about the 3-minute mark, it's got this like really fantastic breakdown that kind of is reminiscent of like the eerie sort of Slayer kind of moments, the Spill the Bloods, those kind of songs, and then it really sort of breaks down into a cool like Viking metal like chant where like Frosthammer.
It's like when everything drops out and he's Frosthammer.
Well, and then the solo just kicks in right away. Yeah, it's really cool. I like the title track a lot too, which it's got a really nice intro, but we just again don't have time to play all that stuff. But I don't know. Maybe for me, it's got the really great drum production. Maybe I was wanting them to do something a little bit different with the standard guitar sound on this record, and it just wasn't varied enough for me. Maybe it's like after 4 or 5 records, like give me something a little bit different. There's a
big gap in time before they put records on. There's so many other things coming in and out that I kind of go back and rediscover their back catalog every time they put it on the record out, because I just forget. It doesn't stay in the repertoire that long for some reason. Yeah.
So I don't know if I'm in the minority on that one, or if you have a personal feeling of what record for you seem to warm to the most out of their back catalog, or because I just don't warm that much.
Snakes it's interesting, but I like listening to whole records, and this seems more like a single record to me.
Gotcha.
But the new record I think has more kind of piss and vinegar back into it than anything they've done in a while.
For sure. And I guess we can kind of introduce it here, and then we'll certainly talk a little bit more about it. But so we're gonna go from Wasted Tiamat into Frosthammer from Snakes for the Divine, and then we're gonna hear a pair of tunes from De Vermis Mysteriis, which just came out in April, and again, Mysteries of the Worm. Almost kind of reminds me of, I always think of Mayhem whenever I see, Mysteriis, the Latin.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, De Mysteriis. Who doesn't, I guess, if you're from there. But one thing that's cool in this song we're going to hear is a totally different guitar quality to Madness of Architect. And it really strikes you and I especially as sounding like a band that we're friends with from Michigan called Beasts in the Fields. And they're a 2-piece sort of like Sabbath instrumental kind of band. I don't know. How would you describe the guitars of Beasts in the Fields and the guitars of Madness of Architect? Because it's Isis Neurosis-y, but not. It's not as like.
Well, it's concerned really with the guitar tone itself. Jordan, the guitar player, has a huge cabinet setup to where stuff's actually split off into the more bassy and the more treble side. So there's almost this weird, almost like flanger vibe to it, but then it's just incredibly overdriven, like Entomb sound almost, but then really warmed up. So it's only 3 notes in this opening part, and that's only and it's just a matter of going through a progression of that. Just this real slow kind of building up a kind of just an atmosphere or vibe.
That's what it is. You're right, and I think that's what I like. And this isn't representative necessarily of the whole new record, because you'll hear another song that we'll end the show with.
It's the only time I've ever heard them do that at all. Yeah. It's something that sounds so much
refreshing, though,
like Beast in the Field, that it's weird to hear
another band kind of doing it. Yeah. And Beast in the Fields is a band we've talked about doing and trying to promote them a little bit down the road. So if you dig a song like this, and you're obviously more familiar with High on Fire's back
and you don't like vocals,
you definitely should investigate some Beasts in the Fields. That's for sure. And so we got Madness of Architect, and then we're going to go into an instrumental, which is a little bit more hypnotic, and again, you're going to hear some really fantastic, I guess, improvisational soloing in both Madness of Architect and Samsara. And then we'll come back and kind of talk a little bit more about the new record and kind of get things going out of here. So we've got Waste of Tiamat from Death Is This Communion, Frosthammer from Snakes for the Divine, and then Madness of Architect and Samsara from De Vermis Mysteriis.
Circle and
It was Samsara, Madness of Architect, Frosthammer, and Waste of Tiamat. And one thing we don't have a long time to say, but speaking of these producers, is Kurt Ballou.
Yes,
is a guy that's associated on this record, and and a song we're going to close with here called "Serums of Lao," Liao. You really hear this sort of like compressed, almost uncomfortable, that like it almost is like about to come off the rails kind of sound that the new Converge record from a year and a half, 2 years ago kind of had.
Kveldurtak. I mean, it's something that Kurt Ballou can
fierce,
really, he can actually like record incredibly like chaotic energy really well. And I think this is probably the best drum production that High on Fire's ever had.
Yeah.
It's really noticeable. There's a certain like, because not every drummer you want to hear individual, everything on the drums, and so it sounds like it's triggered or something. But there's a little bit more, not precision, but a little bit more clarity to each piece. So it sounds like it has much more, instead of just being this steamroller of noise. Yeah. It actually like breaks up and has a little bit more of an interesting sonic quality, I think.
Well, and this song especially opens up with almost like an ode to Painkiller.
Oh, it sounds like, it's totally like Painkiller.
It's pretty nifty, And certainly in those two songs you just heard there, Samsara and Madness of Architect, again, it's more open. There's a hypnotic, almost psychedelic quality to this album that I think was missing from some of the other records where those were more like in-your-face metal. Yeah. It's not afraid to sort of open those kind of doorways up. Really inspired and soulful kind of soloing stuff. But this song we're going to hear is a little bit more kind of standard in your face, and it's got a really cool guitar sound that you start to hear right around the 2:15 mark, and then at about the 4-minute mark or so, you start to hear this cool mixture. I mentioned it's like psychedelic Trey Asgharath, Morbid Angel type soloing, where it's like Altars of Madness kind of stuff, where it's like flying out at you in weird ways. And I think Matt Pike really stretched himself on this with some creativity and really wanted to kind of make a different statement. So definitely, if you haven't picked up the new record, it's something I highly recommend. It's
available now.
It's going to make it on a lot of year-end lists, so probably be on ours for sure. So let us know what you thought, what your favorite High on Fire era is potentially, or maybe this is a band you weren't that familiar with. Check us out at Requiem
Podcast@gmail.com.
Yes, or on the website, requiempodcast.com, iTunes. Leave us a note or become an executive producer on the website.
It always helps.
We greatly appreciate it. So for High on Fire, Serums of Liao from the Vermis Mysteriis, I am Jason.
And I'm Mark.